For attending the Avalara webinar today. Today's presentation will be presented by Maria Tringali with Avalara with assistance from Mike Chiapetto from Turtle and Hughes. So go ahead and take it away, Maria.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gary. Thanks so much for the introduction. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to talk about a fun subject of tax compliance. With me today, as Gary mentioned, is Mike Chiapetto. So Mike is actually one of our customers, and he is with Turtle and Hughes. So I'll introduce a little bit about myself first, and then I'll let Mike do a little introduction of himself and his experience today. So I've been with Avalara a little over 3 years. I've been working in the software world for about 10, and a long-time hospitality and sales and marketing professional. So a lot of years of experience. I love this company, and I love what we do. It's a great time, and it's a very interesting problem, very unique problem to solve every day. So I work very specifically with manufacturers and distributors every day, and have done so since I started here at Avalara. So I'm one of our distribution and manufacturing specialists here. Many of the team come to me and have me on their calls for my expertise. So throw questions at me. Hopefully I can answer them. If I can't, I will be happy to get the answer for you, just about tax compliance in general for your world, or about how automation works, or basically anything related to this subject. So I'm delighted to have Mike with us today. Mike and I were actually out in Forum together and talked with a lot of customers together, and he's got some great experience with our company. So Mike, would you like to introduce a little more about yourself?
Sure. My name is Mike Chiapetto. I actually worked with SX.enterprise with Infor as an Infor employee for 20 years prior to joining Turtle and Hughes. I've been working with them for the last 4 years, and over the years done a lot of implementations of SX.e, general business consulting, assistance with troubleshooting, and included in the implementations have been implementations of interfaces to some of the various sales tax packages that SX.e has been integrated with. And then recently at Turtle, we switched to Avalara almost a year ago. It was January 1 of 17 that we turned the switch on and started doing transactions with Avalara.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mike. So delighted to have you here, and always fun to talk to you, too. So moving on, what we hope to achieve today. So what I'd love to address, and hopefully this is your goal as well, and as Gary mentioned, please do pop questions into the question field in the GoToWebinar program, and I'll pause every once in a while to see if we have any questions in queue. I'm happy to answer them. Want to make this as informal as possible and get your questions answered. I know this is complex stuff. So what I had planned to achieve today is talk a little bit about what problems distributors and manufacturers face when it comes to tax compliance. How do we at Avalara help you solve these, and why customers like Mike's are outsourcing this today. So I'd love Mike to tell you in a little more depth how they chose Avalara and how that whole implementation process went, so you get a little feel for what it's like to actually be a customer. So with that, I want to start with someone here at Avalara. One of my colleagues here recently wrote this, and you don't have to read all the words on it, but the point here is that entrepreneurs start a new business with a dream of what they want to do, what they think they'll be really good at, and they want to make money and be a huge success. Well, the fact is, the second underlined portion is sales tax is typically not even on a customer and not even on an entrepreneur's radar. Unfortunately, it is a part of doing business in our country and can be wildly complex, and way more complex than this entrepreneur who had this big dream had ever actually dreamed of. And so that's why we do this, and one of the reasons why I love doing this is we help customers streamline something that's really distracting them from growing and expanding that business that they still dream about, and they still want to grow and make successful in their family. So that's why we're talking about this. Why are you here today? I'm not really sure. Maybe someone made you attend, but most of the time, and Mike can probably attest to this, when we're at Inform, a lot of people come up to our booth and say, what do you do? And we say, well, we automate sales tax compliance for manufacturers and distributors, and usually the answer is, we don't charge sales tax. I'm a distributor. I don't need this. We sell B2B, so everything is tax exempt. And I get this answer every single day. Even when I have scheduled phone calls with customers, the first thing they say is, well, we don't really do this, so why are we talking? The point is, manufacturers and distributors still have compliance responsibilities. You either have to charge tax or you have to prove why you're not charging tax in the states where you have nexus, which is the responsibility to collect and remit based on a physical presence. So it's really important that manufacturers and distributors are also aware of their compliance responsibilities and what the risks are for their companies. So why we're here is it's not just sales tax. I love this deck because this slide, excuse me, this tax calculations are really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to tax compliance. But that's what we think because we are retail shoppers ourselves and we pay sales tax on items we buy. So that's what most of us think of tax, and that's what I thought before I worked here as well. The truth is, underneath that tip of the iceberg are all these other responsibilities that are CFOs, controllers, finance folks, accounts receivable, accounts payable folks have to worry about underneath just the tax calculation. There's collecting, managing, and tracking those exemption certificates, figuring out where in the world we have nexus and what does that even mean. How do I get registered? If I hire a sales rep in a new state and I know I need to register there, how do I do that? Some of my products and services are and aren't taxable in different places. Freight is taxable someplace, so there's these product-based taxes. Services used to be kind of widely not taxable, but states are creeping up and starting to charge them. How do I know when they're going to be taxed? How do I know when I have to file in a regional or local jurisdiction like in the state of Colorado or the state of Louisiana? How do I know this, and how do I know when my tax returns are due? There is so much more going on underneath that iceberg, the tip of the iceberg of tax calculations. And that's more what we're going to talk about today because that applies in our world in distribution and manufacturing. So the difference or the responsibilities for your organizations, our distributors need to show why they didn't collect. Most distribution companies charge very little tax unless they've started some sort of retail component to their business. So they still need to prove why they didn't collect tax, still need to complete tax return forms and remit taxes or even remit $0 returns for regional, state, and local jurisdictions. This still has to be done whether or not you are charging sales tax to your customer. Nexus still applies. In manufacturers, they have to determine what is taxable and what is exempt for different reasons, whether you're selling that or you're purchasing them, and you still have to determine what is remitted to the state. So manufacturers still have tax compliance needs. What both of those companies have in common is it's not about calculating tax, but essentially proving why you didn't, because the state wants that proof. They want to know that you had a valid certificate on file the day of that sale. Otherwise, they want the tax collected. So let's spend a little time on this whole process. But the first thing, this is kind of Maria's little mental break here, the first thing I like to identify, because I think this gets very confusing for most of us, is there are 3 definitions of exempt. So quite often when I say how many of your purchases are exempt, and they'll say all of them. But there's 3 different ways to look at the definition of exempt. I literally wish we had 3 different ways of defining this, but for whatever reason, this is the way we refer to them. So the first thing is a product-based exemption. An example is food products. So this item generally doesn't require an exemption certificate. That item is just not taxable in that jurisdiction. You don't have to have an exemption certificate for it, so it might be services aren't taxable. The second is use-based. Generally does require an exemption certificate. An example is in the manufacturing process, something that's used in the manufacturing process. That manufacturer is going to provide their vendor with a manufacturer's exemption certificate. I'm taking your product, I'm using it in my product that I'm manufacturing and not selling it yet until I make another product out of it. Therefore, I'm not paying you tax because my end user is going to be paying the tax. That's an example of a use-based case. And then the last is entity entity base, which requires an exemption certificate. And this is what most of us know as distributors, is that relates to the status of that purchaser. So I'm a reseller, so don't charge me tax because I'm going to be charging the end user tax or my customer's tax. So that's entity based, and those require certificates. So 2 out of 3 times we have to have exemption certificates on file and be able to collect, manage, and track these efficiently within our internal processes. So the first thing that brings up to most of you is the challenge of managing those exemption certificates. Where do I have to have them? What do they look like? Where do I keep them? How do I find it when I'm in an audit situation? How do I track all of these? I'm assuming this looks familiar to some of you. It's a challenge to keep track of these. Most customers that I speak with, they say, oh, yep, we collected these when we first started when we first brought on this customer, but frankly, we have no idea where this is. I literally had one customer who had them in a storage room, and that storage room flooded, so they had to go out and collect all new ones. It's really a manual process challenge for most customers. And because, again, back to my little dream screen, this is not a huge priority for manufacturers and distributors. They just put them in a file and kind of leave them there for a while, which can be a really risky process. Secondly, there's the returns and remittance. Most transactions are $0, so it's easy to fill out these forms. Not necessarily. Texas requires a breakdown of where all of your revenue came from nationwide. California and Alabama require individual jurisdictional reporting on that report. So even though it was $0, it's not like you're taking the easy tax form and just putting a 0 on it. You still have to fill out all of the transactional detail that the state requires. So it's not as simple as quite often CEOs might think, well, it's just $0, it should take you 2 minutes. Not necessarily. In a lot of states, you have to spend a lot of time getting this information right, and you don't want to run any risks with getting this information wrong and providing any flags to auditors. So it's still very tedious to complete these. Some of the things, so one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of is with manufacturers and distributors is the addition of e-commerce. So another challenge for you. If you are going to start selling B2C for the first time, many manufacturers and distributors call me and say, we have no idea how to do this. We've never done it. What do we do? And a lot of times that person who calls me is an IT person or even a contracted website person that says, we have to figure out how to calculate tax. So one of our jobs is to take that back to the greater finance department of the company and make sure that calculating tax for e-commerce or for your B2C environment is being melded in and handled in conjunction with your greater tax compliance. There are things like having to figure out how your items are taxed. For my exempt customers, maybe they want to submit an exemption certificate on my website at the same time that they submit a credit application to us. So there's a lot of different things that you want to provide because you still want to provide a world-class shopping experience both to your distributors and to your end customers. So there's a lot of complexity in sales tax adding e-commerce. So one of the things that we joke about here is that your CPAs don't know most of this. CPAs are great. They'll do your business taxes. They'll do your financials. But generally, they don't know a lot about tax compliance. So they outsource to companies like us or work with us. We have a website just for finance folks to learn more about tax. But generally, they'll know about sales tax in their home state, like you probably do, but not as overall across state lines or across the country. So that's where Avalara comes in and able to help both you and your CPA. So let me stop there and see, Gary, if there have any questions come up, or does anyone have any questions at this point about tax compliance?
No questions have been submitted yet. I don't see anybody with their hand raised. So please continue.
All right, so let's move on. Another thing that you have to worry about in our current world is nexus creating activities. And this is something that was somewhat static for a long time. We felt it, I mean, even 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago when I started here, it was generally, do I have an employee, or do I have inventory, or do I have property in a state? And that would cause nexus, which is the responsibility to collect and remit tax. Fast forward to today, states are realizing that they need revenue, which I'll go into in a minute, and they're creating all sorts of different reasons why people might establish nexus in their states so that they can get a cut of that revenue. So there's a lot of other things going on site and repairing a property that you've sold, a hosted data center, a field service staff, even outsourced or contract employees or field service employees can cause nexus for you. Board members, investors, drop shipment, attending a trade show once or twice a year can cause nexus, affiliates, all sorts of things now can establish nexus for your company. And that's, again, the responsibility to collect and remit, so the state wants a cut of that. And if you have established nexus in a state, that state, you will need to register and start collecting tax or collecting exemption certificates or both in those states. So another thing that Avalara can help you with is helping you determine where you have nexus and where you might want to register. We can help you get registered, so we can provide you with a lot of feedback and education and even free resources on helping you determine where you have nexus and make sure that you're tax ready and tax compliant. One of the things I'm asked very, very often is, how does drop shipping affect? And we could do a whole webinar, and we do, actually, Avalara does entire webinars on drop shipping for manufacturers. But suffice it to say, in the triangle of you, your company, the end customer, and the drop shipper, and the warehouse, somebody has to collect and remit the tax. So this can get complex, and usually you'll work with your vendor or shipper to determine whether or not they're going to be exempt, or you're going to be collecting it, or you're charging the end customer. So it's sort of a sales tax triangle, and again, we can go into this in greater detail, but something that you need to be aware of and make sure that somebody, so you can either eat the tax or register and provide an exemption certificate, somebody is paying the tax in that triangle. And that's a complicated scenario just in itself. So several options there. So really, what is the risk of not getting all this stuff right that I've been talking about? Typically, it's you will undercollect or you'll overcollect, and both are not fun. And auditors are getting aggressive. So states have realized that they're a good portion, so these two dark triangles here, a good portion of any state's revenue, the average across the country is 47%, comes from sales tax related revenue. So states have gotten aggressive and essentially hired the tax collectors to go out to businesses and collect this revenue so that they can pay their bills. So companies that they feel are not paying, they get a little more aggressive with. And they're really aggressive with out-of-state sellers. So if you're based in California and you're selling in Texas or Nevada or Washington, the state of Washington loves to audit California businesses because they're not their constituents, and they can be as aggressive as they like. Here in Washington, where I live and where Avalara is based, we have no state sales tax, so our average for sales tax revenue for the state is 54%, and almost every day, every week on the news is a story about sales tax. Should the voters decide whether we should increase this tax or decrease this tax, we need to fund the bridge or the roads or whatever it is, the internal resources, and we need to assess sales tax in order to generate revenue in order to fund these projects. So it's a really, really big focus in my state, and that's why it's becoming so important. Many of you have probably been in an audit scenario. An audit to a small to medium-sized business can cost an average of $114,000 or well over $100,000. That's an 18% increase over just a few years ago. So again, they're getting very aggressive. This information comes from Wakefield Research, who did an independent study, and I think this is sort of funny that they say that the average length of a sales tax audit is 37 days, because it seems to me a lot of people they surveyed must be automating sales tax, because I haven't talked to one customer that doesn't automate where their tax audit only took 37 days. Generally, they'll take 3 months, 6 months, even more. It's a very lengthy process that takes your staff off of what you've hired and trained them to do, and get distracted and disrupted by trying to pull all these reports and records to prove the way they did business and that they don't owe additional taxes. And also from Wakefield, 50% of companies believe that they only owe the taxes that were not originally collected, when the truth is there are fines and penalties that are also due on these back owed taxes, just like with your personal income tax. So this is a very, very expensive situation that you do not want to get into. So automation, any type of automation or repeatable process really helps you streamline this and reduce the risk to your company. Overwhelmed yet? So any questions, Gary, before I kind of pop in and introduce Mike here in a minute?
There is one question. What is the presenter's opinion on the status of Quill and the current case that will be in the Supreme Court this year?
So, of course, we're in the sales tax world. We don't really have an opinion on that. Officially, we don't really have an opinion on the cases that are in front of the Supreme Court right now. What we can tell you, though, is regardless of what happens with that decision, the states are still aggressive at collecting tax and becoming, adding more and more things that are taxable so that they can collect as much tax as possible. So you've probably seen in the news where a lot of states have implemented or tried to implement or put before the voters different tax programs, and they're getting up to the Supreme Court. So we don't really have an official opinion on that. However, we can tell you that that being in the news is really making everyone else be more aggressive and more aware of it, which is all the more reason to automate. So we do like that part regardless of what happens. So
okay. That's the
anything
only question.
Else? Okay.
No, that's it.
Okay, so far. Great. So this is just kind of a silly mental break. I can't make this stuff up. There's a lot of things that are taxable in one place and taxable in another place. Example is janitorial services are taxable, but commercial services are not, which technically means cleaning the inside of a window is taxable, but cleaning the outside of a window is exempt. Just silly things like that. These are things that you have to keep track of that automation would handle for you, and you wouldn't even have to think about this stuff. I just got off the phone, I'll just use this as an example this morning, with a company that works in the trade show business, and just depending on how their customers utilize their items, do they rent them, are they keeping them, are they tossing them, are they returning them, are they freebies, all of this stuff is taking this accountant a full-time job to just try to figure out how each of these items are taxed or not in each of their many scenarios of offering them to their customers, and it can really disrupt a business. So this is an actual case in Florida, and the customer was audited and had to pay fines, and of course they decided to outsource, which is how we know that story. So right about when I get to this part of all this stuff, most of our customers will say help. So the reasons why customers outsource their tax compliance is the same reason why customers have outsourced payroll. So most companies, larger companies, have outsourced payroll now for the convenience. They don't want to get it wrong. It's very risky if you don't pay an employee properly. You're probably going to lose that employee. So same thing with sales tax. It's the same premise. It's time, risk, and aggravation. You just don't want to spend the time on this stuff. It is risky, financially risky for your company, and frankly just aggravating. We love to use this quote that we stole from Peter Drucker, but do what you do best, our dreamer, our entrepreneur, and outsource this other stuff, outsource the rest. Oh, and automation, sorry, I forgot about that little automation there. The average payback for someone using Avalara is 5.4 months, so that the time and effort and money that they've spent on this in the past, there's a very, very fast payback to automating. So I want to give you just a little overview, a brief introduction of what Avalara does, and then I'd like for Mike to step in and tell us a little bit about why they chose Avalara and how the implementation went for them. So what we do is you need to first decide where you have nexus. And if you do have nexus in that state, for your distributors, you'll want to validate that you have an exemption certificate. If you don't have an exemption certificate on file, then you need to determine how that product is taxable. And so all that information is going to flow through from your system and through this validation system. And then if it is tax, that tax would be returned into your accounting system. And because that information, all that transactional information, whether it was exempt or taxable, it's stamped in the Avalara admin console, and then that's how we actually file your return. So that's sort of a trifecta, if you will. And the products that we support, TUG customer products, we have over 550 actual pre-built integrations as a company. But in our world today, we're talking about SX.e, M3, ISM, service management, and FAX and A+. And I work with all of these. I work with customers in all of these systems every day of my life. So we have pre-built integrations that we've built that just plug into your accounting system and do create this automation for you and do the calculation of tax and help you collect, manage, and track those certificates. Here's a quick example of some customers, some Infor customers, and some customers that are using Avalara for their tax calculation. Of course, Turtle and Hughes is on there, one of our faves. So with that, I'd like Mike to tell us a little bit about how they came about finding Avalara, the comparison between our competition, on-premise versus cloud, and that sort of thing. So Mike, I'll let you take things from here.
Okay. Well, we collect sales tax in 35 states right now, so we needed to have something that would keep track of rates and do the updates for us so that we didn't have to do all that manually. And we were using another tax partner of Infor's before and an older product that they had, and we were looking to get something that was a newer product that would specifically help us with locating the right tax for a specific building. The old tax would look at a city, state, and a zip and tell us that that was one of several jurisdictions, and we wanted something that would look at a street address and take us down to the level of calculating the correct tax right at that building. And we also were looking at the tax that we were using, the service being provided, the rates went up quite a bit, and Avalara has always had a more competitive rate that we felt would work well for us. When we moved from it, we went from an on-prem solution to the cloud solution, and we were a little bit nervous about that, but we've found that the connectivity over the cloud has been working really good. There was concern initially about potential for lag and people taking longer to complete orders, and after almost a year of running on it, there is no lag. There's no drawback of any kind that we've seen, and it's nice to not have to worry anymore about updating sales taxes, to even just taking a file and running it to get the update in. All that's in and handled for us, so everything is up to date and current. The implementation process, the interface to SX.e is actually very, very simple. Literally, you could get the interface code installed, compiled, pushed out on your server, put in a few configuration things, and have the sales tax calculations be running in a matter of a few hours. Now, effectively, it takes a bit longer to get ready, to do some diligence of testing things and making sure that they're working okay. Biggest part of the go-live process for us, biggest amount of work, was in getting our addresses cleaned up. Because we were going to a solution that targeted specific buildings, we needed to have good street addresses for all of our customers and, more importantly, our ship-tos. And we had close to 80,000 ship-to records in our system. So there was a lot of data to go through and clean up misspellings of names, and just getting valid data in so that we could take advantage of calculating the right taxes. That process for us, we did, well, from start to finish, we did a 4-week implementation, which was a lot of work and very aggressive. I would say more realistically, six to 8 weeks to get ready to go, but it is possible to do it faster than that.
Oops, sorry about that. Fantastic. Do we have any questions for Mike?
I don't see any questions yet, so carry on.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to add, Mike?
Not right now. I think that covered it for the time being.
Okay.
If there's questions, see what we can talk about. Benefits, actually, because you brought up that point, that reminded me of something. A side benefit that we hadn't expected going into it is once we did all the work of cleaning up our addresses, and it actually, as people are setting up new customers or new ship-tos, it validates that and prompts them to enter a valid address. In the course of doing that, what we found is where we were shipping things out UPS, our instances of chargebacks for bad addresses has gone down to nearly nothing. We were getting a fair amount of chargebacks by UPS because the address just wasn't good, and they had to go do the work to figure out where the building was to make a delivery. Now we're getting packages delivered better, truck drivers doing more efficiently, running their routes and getting packages delivered to people just because our addressing information is better.
That's actually a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up, Mike, because that is something that I try to remind people, but I think it becomes something that you forget as you go through because you're worried about tax compliance, and you forget how much money and time you can actually save your company because of the address validation feature. And there's one thing, maybe did you do this in the beginning? Many of my customers actually, during the testing process, update all of their addresses in their current ERP.
Yes, we did. We went through all 80,000 of our ship-to addresses.
Right.
And did some of that by running it against the USPS database, marking the things that validated and then identifying the ones that needed some work. And then we put a team of people into going through and reviewing those and fixing them.
Wonderful. Yeah, so it's a great kind of side project that gets done in this process. So really, really great benefits there. Terrific. Well, Mike, if you think of anything else, feel free to interrupt me, of course.
There is a question for Mike.
Oh, yes, please.
Is Mike taxing sales to other counties? And does Avalara support Canada and Mexico?
Yes. Yes to Canada. Mexico, we are doing business in Mexico, but we're actually not using Avalara there just because Mexico's taxes are a little simpler than the U.S. It's just a 16% tax rate everywhere. And the way that we're selling in Mexico is we have fixed locations where the sales occur. So there wasn't really any advantage to doing it. On the Mexico side, we are using it to calculate taxes in Canada. And counties, yes, counties.
He meant countries. He didn't mean counties.
Countries, okay, not counties, okay. I was going to say counties is a big reason for using tax softwares. The counties complicate it quite a bit.
Okay.
The countries, only Mexico, and actually only Canada and U.S. we're using Avalara for. Okay. And Maria, you could talk to any other countries that Avalara can help with?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we consider North America is U.S. and Canada, and then we do have several global zones. So we do actually calculate that worldwide. There are very, very few companies that we have not automated. We are just about to launch India. We've already launched Brazil. But we have all of the main countries that you can think of, everything in the EU, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, all of the big major countries, not companies, where we do actually have tax calculation and in a lot of cases remittance capabilities as well, depending on the rules of that country. Some countries require that those that do the remittance must be an in-country company, and we do have a presence in the UK and in the EU, but not in all countries globally. So just depending, so if you do have those needs, we can certainly have a phone call to talk about where you're collecting, remitting, and how we can remit. But we're definitely a global company. I'll be okay.
Okay, there's another question here. Are you familiar with, and do you have clients that are pay when paid vendors?
Very good question. So I think you mean a cash basis accounting as opposed to accrual. And the answer is, the way these integrations are set up is they are based on accrual-based accounting. And that is because the state wants the revenue, in most cases, wants the tax revenue when you actually made that sale, not when you collect it. Some companies have told me that they have permission from the state to be on a cash basis, but I can tell you that automation won't work that way because it does not know when you actually collected the cash from the customer and actually reflected it as revenue. The integration that we're talking about is connected to accounts receivable, into the invoicing portion of accounts receivable, not of your cash receipts. So we don't know, the software doesn't know when that revenue was collected and attributed to that sale. So it's designed for an accrual-based accounting system where you recognize the revenue the month that was invoiced.
Okay, so there's a couple of other questions. I'll go ahead and ask them now. Kevin,
Sure.
I see that you have your hand raised and you've also asked a question. So Kevin, I'm going to ask your question first, and if this covers it, you can lower your hand. Otherwise, I'll unmute you. So his question is, how many SX.e implementations have been done?
Oh, shoot, I don't have that right in front of me, but the SX.e integration just became available about a year ago now, so I think we're at about 10 or 12 at this point, but I would have to double check that for you. I should have looked at that before the call today, but that's a relatively new integration for us, where we have, say, hundreds and hundreds of Sightline customers because we've had a Sightline integration for a really long time. But SX.e is about a year old.
Okay, all right. Looks like Kevin still has his hand raised too, so let me unmute him.
And Kevin, I'll chime in on that too. I'm not sure the actual number, but from using the TUG forum and chatting with other people that are using Avalara, I'd guess that number to be higher, like in the 40 to 60 range. There's quite a few customers that are SX.e customers that are using either the older version of Avalara or the newer one now.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. No, that's good, Mike. Thank you. And Gary, thank you. Almost it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I think there's one other question here. How can I find Avalara in my Infor? So, and I'm not sure what you meant by my Infor, but it came from Chantel.
And Chantel, that would, I'll step in and take this one. That would depend on your version. If you're using SX.e, it would depend on the version that you're using. We're doing running 6.141 right now. And the code, the interface to Avalara from SX.e works with 6.141 and several other versions. It's written for the newer ones, and it's been rolled back, I think, as far as some of the 6.0 versions, but I'm not positive of that. And to turn it on, what you have to do is first purchase that interface. And that interface is something that you can purchase, and then it'll show up as a menu within SX.e. where you can go in and put in the configuration parts and turn that on. In a version 11.6, I believe, it is part of the package. So it's just in the company setup, there's a place to go in and select how the sales taxing is done. And if you select Avalara from that pull-down box, then that turns it on. And then there's still some configuration stuff to do to get it ready.
Okay.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Mike. Thanks.
No more questions.
All right, so back to the how many users do we have? We have, looks like at this point, about 20 SX.e users, and but remember on top of that we also have Fax A+ and ISM customers. So, and we've partnered with Infor for about 11 years now. So, as I mentioned, hundreds and hundreds of Infor customers over time. So, and also plenty of references, like Mike, of folks you can talk to who actually have used our software if you would like to. So we've got about 15 minutes left in the hour. Please, if you have any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them. I want to show you, just in the time we have left, a little bit about Avalara specifically and how it works, so you have kind of a mental image of how this whole process works. So there's three things, really three pillars of Avalara, three main products, and then the fourth one would be our services component, which I've alluded to. So the first thing we have is AvaTax, and this is what Mike's been talking about. So AvaTax is that pre-built integration that we have between Avalara and your accounting system. We integrate with the 5 that I showed you, plus about 545 other accounting point of sale and e-commerce applications. So we would be able to integrate with any application that you're using within your business. So if you're adding e-commerce, as we talked about, or you have acquired another company that might be using Sage 100, we would be able to also integrate with that company, whether it's temporarily until you bring them on to one main system, or whether it's long-term. You can have as many integrations with Avalara, and that allows you to have just one Avalara admin console in a centralized place for all things sales tax. And as we talked about briefly, AvaTax includes that address validation feature. We need to validate the address in order to pinpoint pinpoint that address in order to determine how everything is taxed there at that location. So say you're sending something to my house, they need to know that there's a state tax in Washington, a city tax in Seattle, and also a transportation tax for the light rail here. So we need to pinpoint that address in order to calculate the right amount of tax. So you get the benefit of that, as Mike mentioned. So that's the first part, and that's the integration with your system. The second is CertCapture. CertCapture is a really cool web-based application that allows you to collect, manage, and track exemption certificates. So instead of collecting these on paper and sticking them in a file somewhere in the back room, you can literally collect these digitally from your customer, and they're stored in this web-based database that has communication tools. It has an email tool and a direct mail tool. You can run reports on these, and so you have them all in one centralized place. So what's most important is when your system reaches out to AvaTax to calculate tax, the first thing it does is it checks for an exemption certificate. If you have one on file, then it won't calculate tax. If you don't have one on file for that customer, then it's going to calculate the right amount of tax for every item on that invoice. And then the third thing we do is we help you file your returns. So we literally complete the returns forms for you, and you'll do a reconciliation, and then we'll actually do the filing and remittance for you. So you'll send us one ACH payment, and we'll return all of the returns along with the revenue due to that jurisdiction. And if I could have a fourth column on this slide, it would be our services arm. So we have tax advisors, most of whom are former state sales tax auditors themselves, who work with our customers to help determine where they have nexus. If you have a horrible audit or you're just getting audited and you want help, we can help you with that. We can help you determine the taxability of products or how products should be taxed. All sorts of things that our services team can help you with. Get registered, do VDAs if you didn't get registered and you didn't know you were supposed to. So all kinds of services. So we are basically all things sales tax. Again, a lot more than your normal CPA is. So a visual of how Avalara works is we have over 100 people in what we call our content department. I hope I'm showing my screen. Yes, I am. Okay, just wanted to make sure. So we have over 100 people in our content department. And these people literally keep up relationships with all of the taxing jurisdictions out there in the US, Canada, and globally. They literally have relationships with taxing jurisdictions. So if a city is going to vote in, say, the transportation tax, for example, here where I live, they'll know when that tax is supposed to start and when that tax is supposed to end and keep that up in our cloud-based environment. So this hard drive here would be your accounting system or your e-commerce or any other system that you're using. That integration that we talked about replaces the sales tax tables that you would normally create when you create a new customer, or when you create an invoice, you pick the proper tax table. You no longer have to do that. That integration replaces that sales tax field with the word AvaTax, and that is an API. That is what makes an API call. That's why we have this integration. So that word AvaTax is the connection. It will make a call every time you create a quote, an order, a final invoice, a return, an exchange. Whenever you total that order, that is the cue for your system to make a call out to Avalara. And based on about 10 pieces of data, origin address, destination address, what's being sold, what's the quantity, etc., we check for a certificate. If there is one, then we won't calculate tax for that company at that location. If there isn't one, then we are going to calculate the right amount of tax for every item on that invoice and return that dollar amount onto your invoice. And all of that I just said in about 10 or 15 seconds, it happens in literally 0.67 of a second. You don't even see it happening. So your customer service reps, your sales reps won't see anything happen. All they do is total up that order, and the sales tax is magically accurate, 100% accurate on that invoice. Then, because all of your transactional data is flowing through the Avalara admin console, that's what allows us to complete those returns. So we have all of the detail of your transaction, the actual ship-to addresses, the quantities, the items that were sold, the discounts, tax charge, all of that information is available to us. So we complete the returns for you. You do a reconciliation, make sure you approve, and then we remit those returns and the revenue out to each of those governmental entities. Are there any questions about that process, just visually?
I'm not seeing any questions about the process. I did see the question that Kurt asked about the Avalara standard interface, but it looks like Mike answered it for everybody in the question and answer bank. So, but along those lines, though, it talked about the interface between Avalara and AvaTax and SX.e. What about A+ and Fax?
So we also have integrations with all of those. Yep.
Okay, and they're all standard. As, you know, you don't have to purchase any other secondary interface product.
No, no. There is, depending on the product and the version, there may be an implementation cost. Some have it and some don't. So it just depends on your individual product. So in some cases, like the version of SX.e that Mike's using, there were some implementation costs because you can have some customizations, and we need to make sure that the integration is working properly. But in the brand new version of SX.e, the 11.x, where we're actually a built-in module, there's no installation required. You just need to activate it, and then it's there, and you do the setup. So just depending on your version, there might be some costs, but all the software and the system works exactly the same. This sort of world of AvaTax that you're looking at here works identical for any company in any industry.
Okay, and there are no further questions posted.
Okay, so just wrapping up then, the summary of really what we're doing with automation is cert capture is really where your risk is, and this ability to collect, manage, and track exemption certificates in a centralized database saves companies months and months during a sales tax audit and just hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you can prove in a split second that you had a certificate on file the date you made that sale, the auditor has nothing to go on. So this is really this is why I call our manufacturer and distributors MVP. It's really the most valuable application that you could have. And most people, again, I talk to distributors and manufacturers every day of my life, and most people do not have a process of any sort to track, collect, track, and manage these certificates. So, I really recommend looking at that internally. I'll just skip over that, just a little example of what that looks like. And then the second thing is automating those returns. This is a really, really time-consuming process for accountants. And really what most of this is running reports and filling out forms. One of my colleagues compares this to, well, you don't have your accountant just look at your taxes and then give you all the numbers and make you fill out the forms. They fill out the forms for you. And that's the same idea. It's really not worth your time to be filling out forms and doing this sort of manual labor that can now be automated with modern technology, if you will. So we have our little happy person there that will remit those. And just a couple other customer examples. Executive Envelope, great success story. They're a smaller manufacturer, about 12 people. They automated. Minor, they have over 300 employees in 8 locations, and they are super, super happy customer. They've eliminated errors. They don't have to look up all these rates. Nature's Earth Products, 40 years. They're a 13-year-old company. They're a great example of that entrepreneurial story that I mentioned, who manufacture really good quality pet products in California and Florida. They're in some of the most difficult states. So just some great successes. Just for example. And that's really all I have for you today. So if we have any other questions, do let us know. Otherwise, I will turn this back over to Gary.
Thank you, Maria. I don't see any other questions, so we can go ahead and wrap up the webinar. I want to thank everybody for attending, and Maria and Mike, thanks for a great presentation. So everybody have a great day, and thank you.
Thank you.